It's time for the box office top 10. Mark at number 10 is Borderlands.
Which is rubbish. It's just rubbish.
This is a video game adaptation, right?
Yeah, that's a polite way of describing it.
Oh, really? Wow. All right.
Oh, yeah.
Avoid.
It's rubbish.
Here's someone who's seen it, Richard Purdom. He says, Dear Mark and Ben, I recently watched the recent Borderlands film. As someone who isn't a huge fan of the games, I went in with low expectations, just hoped it would pass the time. And it did, technically. In the same way that a cavity search would pass the time. Time would definitely pass. The clock showed later coming out than it did going in, but none of it was enjoyable. And I wouldn't necessarily want to repeat the experience. Yours, Richard Purdom. I think that sums that one up. UK and US number 9 is Stree 2.
Which wasn't press screened. This is Woman 2 Terror of the Headless. It's a Hindi language comedy horror. If anyone's seen it, please let us know, because I'd love to know what it's like.
Okay, UK number 8, US number 4 is one of your favourites, Mark. It's Twisters. It's
yeah,
really clever.
Look,
they made it
there's some Twisters.
Plural, because it's a sequel. It's more Twisters.
Yeah, and somebody said, but they did that with Alien and Aliens. Yeah, but the difference is Aliens actually had a different story, whereas Twisters, it's just... I mean, look, I was in the screening when it was the IMAX screen when it was first previewed, and everyone went nuts and everyone loved it. But it's just, you remember Twister? It's that, but more.
Okay. The UK and US number 7 is Inside Out 2.
Have you seen this, Ben?
Yep. And I had, I was listening to you and Sanjeev talking about it last week, and you said something about, the adolescent experience and families returning to watch it when their kids were older. That was my exact experience. So Inside Out, the original, I watched numerous times with my kids when they were much smaller, and, we were all in tears every time with the imaginary friend and everything. It's one of the greatest family films of all time, I would say. One of them. So it's a tough act to follow. However, going in to watch Inside Out in the cinema, Inside Out 2, with teenagers was a really interesting experience. And it really felt like it completed something for us. Of course, it's not Inside Out. Nothing could be Inside Out. But I found it profound in another way, because it felt like we'd grown with the film.
And clearly, from all the mail we've had, loads and loads of people have had that experience. So there's no question that it's finding its audience and it's doing what it set out to do, which is a remarkable achievement.
UK 6 and US 8 is the aforementioned Trap. Got an email on this. Chris says, I went to see Trap with the good lady animal welfare expert her indoors, which helped to serve as a reminder that when watching a film, everyone sees different things within it from their own unique perspective. Yes. However, in this case, it would appear that one of us had been watching a completely different movie entirely. When it got to the scene where Cooper speaks to Lady Raven on their own, my wife turned around to me and said, wait, was he the killer? This surprised me, as it seemed incredibly obvious up to this point that he was the killer, thanks to a mix of his actions and the narration of Lady Exposition herself, Hayley Basil Mills. It turns out that she had misinterpreted the film from the get-go. She thought that the police that were at the concert were fake police that were set up to allow the real serial killer to kill as many people in the auditorium, and that Josh Hartnett's character was trying to work out who the killer was and stop him using his firefighting skills. With his subsequent behavior up to that point, an attempt to try to get into the mind of the killer and find him before he could carry out any more crimes. Even the more obvious scenes where he scalded a woman with chip fat to evade detection, and an earlier scene when he was checking his phone, wasn't enough to realize that he may not be the nicest guy. It really wasn't until it was completely spelt out that he was a rotter that it finally dawned on her what the film was really about. It turns out that everyone approaches a film differently, but some of us create a completely different narrative to what the makers of the film were expecting us to. Wow. Anyway, we both enjoyed it. Josh Hartnett played the charming yet sinister character to a T, but it trailed off.
Yeah, I love the idea that you can completely reinvent the film in your head. Sorry to do the first Exorcist reference. I remember Bill Blatty telling me that one of the worst reviews he got for The Exorcist was somebody who said, well, we meet this guy at the beginning of the film in Iraq and then he's never seen again. And Bill Blatty went, he's literally the Exorcist. I don't know what else I could say. That's who he is. He turns up at the end and he performs the exorcism. It's the same guy. But hey, I'd actually pay quite good money to see the version of the film in which he's not the killer, but there's somebody else.
Yeah. I feel like Christopher's wife needs a right to reply here. I hope we hear from her next week, because this is really This feels like the classic one-upmanship in the marriage. He even ends by saying, "I also discovered my wife not only hasn't seen The Sixth Sense, but doesn't know what the twist is."
Well, in that case, there's a real treat ahead. Fantastic. What'll happen is she'll watch The Sixth Sense and go, Haley Joel Osment is a killer?
I think she needs Hayley Mills in every film she watches, but let's wait to hear from her. UK number 5 and US 6 is Despicable Me 4, bottom.
Exactly. Thank you. I find Minions funny. I'm not going to take it back.
Not enough of them in this, though.
No, but, it's not a Minions film. It's a film with Minions in it, but it's not a Minions film.
Sure. UK 4 and the US number 5 is the 15th anniversary edition of Coraline.
So fabulous to see it doing so well on its anniversary reissue. There is an exhibition at the BFI if you're interested in it, which is all about the magic of stop motion, and stop motion is fabulous. And God, it's properly weird. I mean, it's a kids' film, but the button eyes are just scary.
Terrifying. The UK's number 3 and the America's number 2 is Deadpool and Wolverine. 2 for the price of 1 there.
Just a staggering amount of money for a film which is
He's
literally...
folded his arms, guys.
I mean, have you seen this, Ben?
No, I just couldn't be bothered, Mark. Honestly, I watched Endgame and it was called Endgame. And I was like, that's it. Great. Brilliant. I'm done. That's the end game.
It was literally called Endgame. And now here we are, many years later, with people playing around in the rubble and every now and then saying a rude word. Well, not every now and then, every other word saying a rude word. My friend Van Connor, who is the target audience for this film, said that he really enjoyed it. So, there we go.
Fair enough. I was just going to say, as my kids put at the end of a lot of texts, CBA. And that's how I felt about this movie.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Proved wrong. UK's number 2 and America's number 3 is It Ends With Us,
which I was actually pleasantly surprised with, dealing with a difficult issue, but doing it in a way which is very, very accessible.
And the UK number 1 and US number 1 is Alien Romulus. Got a couple of emails on this. Charles Dodd says, "Dearest Doctors, just left after watching a midday screening of Alien Romulus and thought I'd share my views with your good selves." Well, I went into this with high hopes that they might nail it this time. I have to say, I left the cinema with a heavy heart.
Oh.
It was an interesting enough setup, the utter unbelievability aside, but from the moment they decided to shoehorn in a legacy character, for me it started to come undone. Nod after nod after nod to classic lines and classic setups only made me wish I was actually watching Alien. Or Aliens instead. And when said character gives us the exposition of how we got here, I found myself thinking, that actually sounds like a good film. Why didn't they make that instead? There are a few decent ideas and interesting setups, zero gravity acid blood being the main one, but the absolutely bonkers final act, another nod perhaps this time to Alien Resurrection, was so obvious that when it arrived, I held my head in my hands. It also completely derails the whole thing. Lighting, tone, and feel would be a better way to service us fanboys, rather than this continual checklist that takes away from the experience rather than adds to it. Let's hope this ends here. Enough is enough. Charles Todd. Enough is on a separate line, by the way. It's the end game. Charles Todd. And Christoph from Birmingham says, Alien Romulus is definitely one of the better recent installments of the franchise.
I think so.
I found the human-android interactions more interesting than all the struggles with the xenomorphs, which seem to largely consist of opening and closing doors at just the right or wrong time. By adding more backstory and explanations, and by essentially repeating visuals from previous installments with better CGI, the films are becoming less and less scary than the original, which is so engaging because of everything that the audience and the crew of the Nostromo don't know. That's from Christoph. So it's almost a positive, but...
Yeah. I think it's definitely a game of two halves. The good stuff is many of the effects are very, very physical. Kaylee Spaney is very good and a very good stand-in for Sigourney Weaver. And it's definitely true that he knows how to direct a tense set piece, and there is a lot of stuff in this that owes a debt to Don't Breathe. The downside, the legacy character thing done with, through the miracle of computer graphics is really stupid, not least because it's that particular character. You might as well have just got somebody wearing a William Shatner mask that's gone a bit melty and gone, or even had like a talking skull. You don't need to do it. So that's completely pointless. And it doesn't make any sense. And outside of two central characters, the crew are pretty, the characters are pretty dispensable. But it's much better than the Prometheus stuff, which all that ooga booga backstory about engineers and oh, this was all destined, and it was all. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. It wasn't. The whole point about the original film was it wasn't destined. They arrived there because they misread a beacon. And then it turns out the company was sending them there. That's the, anyway. So, but I as a cinematic experience, I enjoyed Romulus. It makes no sense. And the legacy character is really annoying. But other than that, I think it's got some good set pieces in it.
Yeah, and they still can't do mouths, right? They need to just stop until they can do mouths.
It was like watching the first Final Fantasy
mouths,
film.
come back to me.
Yeah, exactly. When you can get somebody to do that properly, it honestly, the mouth work. I mean, the mouth work on that character is absolutely catastrophic.